Hey everyone, ready for another deep dive? Today we're tackling the question of who really takes the lead in relationships.
Smells juicy.
You bet. We'll be dissecting a podcast called The Relationship Playbook, Who Takes the Lead.
Oh, I've heard of that one. It's got some interesting ideas.
It really does. It kind of gets to the heart of whether there's one key player in a relationship or if it's more nuanced than that.
It's a big question for sure. A lot of people seem to have strong opinions about it too.
For sure. So let's unpack this, shall we? The podcast starts by looking at those traditional roles we often see.
Right. The whole men as providers and protectors, women as caretakers and nurturers.
Yeah, exactly. And at first glance, it kind of seems clear-cut.
Yeah.
But the podcast, it makes a really good point that sticking rigidly to these roles, it can actually be a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, I mean, those traditional roles, they might sound straightforward on paper, but in reality, they can create a ton of pressure and misunderstandings.
And even resentment, right? If one person feels like they're always carrying more weight, it's like trying to cram a square peg into a round hole. It just doesn't work.
Exactly. And that's where the podcast gets interesting. It shifts gears and dives into a more modern perspective where both partners, they contribute equally to the relationship.
I like that, more equal. So it's less about fitting into these predetermined roles and more about each person using their strength, like a more personalized approach.
Right. It's about creating a balanced dynamic, kind of like a dynamic duo, where each person's individual strengths complement the other. And when you combine those strengths, well, you create something way more powerful.
I love that analogy. And it actually aligns with what they said in the podcast. They used the words teamwork and diversity to describe this approach.
Right. And it highlights how it's not about like erasing individuality. It's about weaving those individual strengths together to make something richer.
Okay, so communication is key for making that teamwork and diversity thing work.
Yeah, for sure. Both partners need to be, actively involved, both in making decisions, but also, and this is important, offering emotional support too. And that, leads to a much stronger connection.
Okay, that makes sense. But hold on. The podcast also brought up something that kind of threw me off. They mentioned that some people argue that maybe having a designated key player for certain aspects of the relationship could actually make things simpler.
Yeah, I remember that part. They gave the example of one person handling finances while the other takes the lead on, say, emotional well-being. And it makes sense at first glance, right?
Right, like a division of labor almost. It definitely streamlined things. But then wouldn't that just reinforce those traditional roles we were just talking about?
Yeah, and it kind of makes you wonder, what happens when life, throws one of its inevitable curveballs? What if someone gets swamped at work or a family emergency pops up? Could that create a lot of problems?
Totally. Those rigid roles wouldn't hold up for long in the real world, would they?
Not at all. That's why the podcast stresses being flexible. Like, relationships should be more like a willow tree, able to bend with the wind, adapt to each person's needs. If not, they risk snapping under pressure.
That's a great way to put it. So we need to be able to go with the flow, adapt to whatever life throws at us. And speaking of real life examples, the podcast shared some stories from actual couples about how they handle this whole taking the lead thing.
Oh, yeah. Those were really interesting. I remember one couple talked about how they started with these super defined roles, but realized it just wasn't working.
What happened? Did they try to, force it?
Well, they eventually realized they needed to shake things up a bit. So now they try to share responsibilities in a more, fluid way. And it's actually brought them closer.
Wow, so changing things up can actually strengthen the bond. That's pretty powerful.
It is. And there was another story, one where someone felt super pressured to be the emotional anchor in the relationship.
Oh, wow. So they were carrying the weight of everyone's feelings.
Yeah. Exactly. And it totally became too much to handle. But then they opened up to their partner about feeling overwhelmed, and they were actually able to share that responsibility.
So once they started talking and working together, things got better.
Way better. And that's the thing, these stories, even though they're short, show just how important communication is and being open to change, doing it together.
Absolutely. So it seems like the big takeaway here is that healthy relationships, they're not about one person calling all the shots.
Right.
It's about balance. Would you agree with that?
100%. I think the podcast conclusion was spot on. They said it's all about mutual respect, open communication, of course, and shared responsibility.
So it's not about power struggles or like trying to one-up each other. It's about building something together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And both partners should feel, empowered to bring their unique talents to the table.
Like your own personal spice to the mix.
Ugh.
So we've talked a lot about how relationships are more like a dance than a rigid structure, and that being flexible is super important. But how do we actually get there? How do we create that kind of, adaptable, thriving partnership?
Yeah, it's one thing to talk about it, but actually putting it into practice.
Yeah.
That's the real challenge.
Totally. So where do we even begin?
Well, I think one of the biggest hurdles is just how we view relationships in the first place. That we almost see them as a game with winners and losers instead of like a collaborative journey where both people can win.
Yeah. It's like we're so used to those power struggles. But this deep dive is like totally flipping the script, showing us how amazing it can be when both people feel empowered to contribute their own unique strengths and stuff.
Totally. And it reminds us that, healthy relationships, they're not about finding this like perfect, unchanging balance. It's a process, like a river, adapting to the curves and bends,
I love that image. It's so fluid. And it reminds me of something I read a while back about how important it is to celebrate each other's wins, even the little ones. Like it just adds fuel to the fire of that shared journey.
Oh, I love that. Celebrating the wins. Because it really reinforces the idea that you're on the same team.
Right.
Like you're paddling the same boat, metaphorically speaking. And it helps to build that sense of like shared joy, which can only make the bond stronger.
Right. It's not about one person being better than the other. It's about supporting each other, even while you're both, growing as individuals. Like imagine two climbers, each scaling their own mountain, but connected by a safety rope, cheering each other on along the way.
That's such a great visual. And that sense of shared purpose, that's essential. When both people are working towards something together and they genuinely celebrate each other's achievements, it's like this positive feedback loop. And that energizes the entire relationship.
And you know what else is cool? It shows that personal growth and that collective growth as a couple, they can actually go hand in hand. They can even like boost each other. They don't have to be at odds.
Absolutely. When you have a partner who like genuinely champions your dreams and celebrates your accomplishments, it gives you this incredible feeling of like momentum.
Yeah.
That pushes both of you forward.
It's like having a personal cheerleader, always in your corner.
Yeah.
Okay, so what if supporting your partner means letting go of some of those traditional roles or expectations we talked about before? Like being willing to, try new things and let the relationship evolve organically.
Oh, that's so important. Sometimes it means stepping outside your comfort zone, trying on different hats, maybe taking on new responsibilities. But that willingness to adapt together, that's often what allows a relationship to like fully blossom.
Okay, so thinking about your own experiences, what are some of the biggest roadblocks couples face when it comes to, sharing the lead or finding that balance we've been talking about?
That's a good question. I think one of the biggest ones is it's overcoming those deep-seated societal expectations, those gender roles we've been absorbing since we were kids.
Yeah, it's like we've been handed the script about how our relationships should be. And it can be super hard to break free from that, even if we want to.
Right. It's like those messages become part of us, influencing our behavior without us even realizing it. So the first step is becoming aware of those beliefs and having those honest conversations with your partner.
Like holding up a mirror to the relationship and seeing those hidden patterns together.
Exactly. And that requires being vulnerable and truly listening to what your partner has to say, even if it's hard to hear.
It's like you said before, creating that safe space where you both feel comfortable being yourself without feeling judged. It's about understanding, even when you disagree. Okay, so what about those inevitable power dynamics that come up in any relationship? Even the really healthy ones. It's like there's this constant dance of give and take, And finding that balance can be, well, pretty tricky.
Ooh, that's a good point. Because those power dynamics, they're always there, even if we don't always see them. So the key is to be mindful of them. Make sure that power is being shared in a way that feels, fair and respectful for both people.
So it's like making sure both dancers have the space to move freely, instead of one person always leading and the other always following.
I love that because it's all about finding that rhythm, right? Where both people feel heard and respected and like they can contribute their own unique strengths to the dance.
And I imagine that can be super hard during those big life changes. Like if one person suddenly has way more responsibility at work, or if there are, health issues in the family, those things can really throw off the balance, can't they?
They absolutely can. And those are the times when being flexible becomes, well, even more important. It's about leaning on each other, being understanding, and figuring out how to redistribute those responsibilities so it feels fair for both of you. It's like adjusting the sails on a boat, to handle those sudden gusts of wind.
That's a great way to put it. So those moments of stress, they're not always bad, right? They can be opportunities to learn and grow, to become even stronger as a couple. It's like going through a storm together and then coming out on the other side even more connected.
Exactly. And even in those tough moments, remember to celebrate those little wins.
Yeah.
Just acknowledging each other's efforts can make a huge difference in keeping that connection strong.
Yeah, it's like those little acts of appreciation are the glue that holds it all together. So, tying all of this back to the podcast we've been deep diving into, what were some of their big takeaways about building a balanced and fulfilling relationship?
Well, they were super big on communication, like really open and honest communication, creating that safe space where both partners feel like they can say what they need to say, you know, without being judged.
And it's not just talking, it's about truly listening, trying to understand your partner's point of view, even when you don't necessarily agree with it.
Exactly. It's like you got to put yourself in their shoes, see the world through their eyes, and you also got to be open to compromise, finding solutions that work for both of you, even if it means, letting go of how you thought things should be.
And the podcast also talked about being adaptable, right?
Right.
Recognizing that relationships are always evolving, so you have to be willing to, shift roles and responsibilities along the way.
Yep. It's like acknowledging that the dance steps might change, the music might shift, but as long as you're both willing to move together, the dance goes on.
And they also touched on supporting each other's growth,
Yeah.
right? Like recognizing that individual happiness can actually contribute to a stronger relationship.
Yes. Both dancers need their time to shine, to explore their own style, and that can actually make the whole dance even more beautiful.
So it all boils down to this. A healthy relationship isn't about one person being the boss, right? It's about that balance where both people feel respected and valued, like equals.
Totally. It's a true partnership
Yeah.
where both voices matter and both dreams are nurtured, and where you both feel empowered to contribute your own unique strengths and support each other's growth.
It's like creating a space where you can both thrive, both individually and as a couple. Okay, so if we were to condense all of this into a few pieces of advice, what would you say to someone who wants to build a more balanced relationship? Where do they even start?
Well, I'd say prioritize communication. Carve out that time to have those real, honest talks with your partner about, what you need, what you expect, what you want out of the relationship, and create that safe space where you can both share your fears and dreams without feeling judged.
And don't forget that communication is a two-way street. So it's not just about talking, it's about truly listening to what your partner has to say, even if it's different from how you see things.
Yeah, for sure. And be flexible. Relationships change, people change. So be open to adjusting roles and responsibilities as you go. And don't be afraid to, shape things up a bit. Challenge those old beliefs about how things should be.
And maybe the most important thing, celebrate each other's successes, big and small. Build that culture of appreciation and support because those little gestures, they can make a world of difference, especially when things get tough.
Yeah, they really can. And I think all of this gives people a framework for building a relationship that's both strong and fulfilling.
For sure. And remember, a healthy relationship is a journey. It's not about reaching some perfect endpoint. It's about embracing all the ups and downs together. Facing the challenges, celebrating the wins, and always working to create that dynamic where you both feel loved and supported.
Beautifully said. And with all of this in mind, let's go back to that question from the podcast. The one about how you and your partner might adapt and grow together as those roles change over time. That's what we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive.
Okay, so let's circle back to that question the podcast left us with. The one about how we adapt and grow together, especially when those roles in our relationships start to, shift and change over time. It really makes you think, doesn't it?
It does. It reminds us that relationships are always evolving and that being able to navigate those changes, well, that's a big part of what keeps them strong.
Yeah, because it's not like we have one conversation about who does what and then it's settled forever, right?
Exactly. Life throws all sorts of curveballs our way, and we have to be able to adjust. And that means keeping those lines of communication open, being willing to revisit those conversations about roles and responsibilities as things change.
Like checking in with each other and saying, hey, is this still working for both of us? Do we need to tweak things a bit?
Exactly. It's about creating that space where both people feel comfortable, you know, speaking up about their needs and expectations. And that requires trust, vulnerability even.
Because if you don't feel safe sharing those more, well, those more vulnerable parts of yourself, those fears and insecurities, it's hard to have those honest conversations, right?
Absolutely. It's about knowing that your partner will listen without judgment, that they'll be there to support you, even when things get tough. That's what builds that sense of trust and connection.
And knowing that you're both committed to finding solutions together, even if it means compromise or, letting go of how you thought things should be.
It's about remembering that you're on the same team, working together to navigate whatever life throws your way.
Yeah.
Like you're both in the same boat, paddling towards the same destination.
I like that team mentality,
Well,
because it shifts the focus away from, me versus you and puts it on us. Like we're in this together.
exactly. And when you approach it that way, well, it just makes facing those challenges, celebrating those wins, so much more meaningful because you're sharing it all with someone who has your back.
So as we wrap up our deep dive today, let's bring it back to you, the listener. We've looked at this idea of who takes the lead in a relationship, and it's pretty clear it's not about one person being in charge. It's about finding that balance, that sweet spot where you both feel empowered, respected, and valued.
And where you both feel free to contribute your unique strengths, to support each other's growth, and to navigate those inevitable changes together.
So we encourage you to think about your own relationships. What does taking the lead mean to you? And how can you and your partner work together to create that kind of dynamic?
A dynamic that allows you both to thrive, both individually and as a couple. Because at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. Creating a relationship that feels like a source of strength, support, and, well, just pure joy.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, everyone. We hope it's given you some food for thought as you continue to explore the beautiful and, let's be honest, sometimes messy world of relationships.